So if you haven't already downloaded the Photoshop file that goes with this assignment, do that now and put it into your folder called Source Images. I'll give you a second to do that if you haven't already. Once you've got that completed, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a basic cube. So I'm going to go to my poly modeling. I'm going to grab out a cube, drag it up, and then I'm going to change my settings real quick. I want the width to be 1, the height also 1, and the depth also 1. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and we're going to recenter that by coming over to the P Cube tab, and we're going to set the translation. This is the movement tool, so we're going to, the numbers that go with the movement tool, we're going to set all of those back to 0. We're going to make sure that the rotation tool numbers are all set to 0, and our scale is 1 all the way across. So translation 0, rotation 0, and X, Y, and Z, and then our scale in X, Y, and Z is 1 on all of those. So we have a perfect cube centered perfectly inside of our grid. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can see it. Looks good. Now we're going to add a texture to this, okay? And we're going to assign a new material the same way we've done in the past. Now that new material that we're adding is not going to be a Blinn or a Lambert. We're actually going to use the Arnold materials. The Arnold materials are much higher quality. You get a much better resolution. The Arnold renderer is a higher quality resolution setup and resolution camera and renderer. Now, it works much better if you use the standard surface piece because that's actually part of the Arnold renderer. You can use Blinn, you can use Lambert, but they sometimes don't come out as well and they sometimes turn out grainy. So since we want a high quality picture or a higher quality picture and we're going to use the Arnold renderer, we're going to use the standard surface as well. Just like you did when you did a Lambert, it'll create a tab over here called standard surface. We're going to call this block faces, all one word with a capital F. And we're going to set our weight to a full 1. That's going to make the picture be fully bright and use the image. You'll notice that this just got brighter when I did that. Okay. On the right-hand side over here, I'm going to use that same checkerboard pattern that we used when we did a Lambert to do files. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to choose File here. That takes me to a new tab, and it allows me to choose the file that we're working on. Now I've already saved inside of my source images the block pattern. So inside that source images, there's that Photoshop document. I'm going to go ahead and click open. And then I'm going to tap the number 6, and then I should be able to see it. Now, just like we did when we were working with the face and doing the things the other day, you'll notice that none of this aligns up. So one of the things we need to do is we need to set our UV so that everything is in the proper place. So I'm going to go to UV editor, and if your object doesn't show inside of this window, it's because it's not selected. So I'll have to just click once on it. And then there's my picture. I've got everything in there. So I need to start setting this so that my sides of my cube match up with the images that I see here. And you're going to notice that the image is a little squat. It's a little bit kind of scrunched from top to bottom, and it's a little bit wider than a perfect cube. So I need to do that with my faces of my cube that I've created. Now, I'm not actually changing the cube itself. I'm just changing the mapping between the cube and the picture. So I'm going to switch to face view. I'm going to drag a box around everything so it highlights, and it's really difficult to see. So I'm actually going to come up here up to the top, and I'm going to turn that down a little bit so I can kind of fade out that picture in the background and see the actual images better. So these are my sides. They're my orange sides. There's 6 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And just like you can when you're working with an object, I can use the same tools as I did before. So I can use the W key and I can move this up and down. I can use the R key and I can resize. So if it needs to be a little bit wider, I'm going to take and pull this out so that it matches the width of my blocks A1 and B here. So it's the right width. Now the height needs to be adjusted. So I'm going to grab the top box up there and do this. I don't want to use this one here because that's going to translate everything together. And I need to actually kind of squash and stretch it. So I definitely want to use the ones at the end of the lines to take and do these adjustments. So I can bring it down a little bit. I can use the W key and I can kind of recenter if I need to kind of put things where they need to be. Click the R key again, do a little bit more adjustment. And there's a little bit of just kind of fiddling with this until you get to exactly the right place and you see exactly what you need. So I've got a little bit of space around the 3. I've got a little bit of space around the C, same around the 2 and the 1. I'm going to move this up just a little bit, give myself just enough space between the top and the bottom of each one of those. So that looks good. I like it. my boxes for each of my sides match exactly where I have for all of the sides in my picture. This looks like it's going to actually distort the box, but when I turn this off, you'll notice that the box is still perfectly cubed. It's exactly 1 by 1 by 1. The only thing that it does is it takes the picture and squashes it into that area. So it's only distorting that texture around the outside. It's not changing anything else as you look at that, okay? So now that we've got that on there, we've got the cube selected. I'm going to switch back to object mode. And then you'll notice there's my block face piece. My weight is all the way up, my color. And so that looks good. So this is basically my block. It's ready to go. If I were to take and turn on my renderer and flip to Arnold, the first thing I'm going to notice is that I see absolutely nothing. Since Arnold is a high quality renderer, it does not have an automatic light that appears. So since we haven't put any lights in this, it's going to be black. So our next step is to go ahead and put in some lights. I'm going to zoom out to do that. And I'm going to do a kind of a flat area light. If you've ever worked with kind of a camera or a lighting set, you may notice those big black boxes with kind of the white front faces on them. They're called soft boxes. And so basically what they are is just a flat surface with a light behind it, and this is white. We're not going to build the whole box. We're just going to turn this into the flat front surface of a light. And the way we do that is by drawing out that plane. So I used this tool right here, dragged myself out a plane on the bottom, and then I'm going to switch from modeling to rendering. So now that I'm in the render set, I can go underneath Arnold and I can change this piece. So I'm going to use my selection tool. I'm going to make sure I'm on object mode, and I'm going to hit this second button here. It's called Create Mesh Light, and it's going to turn this from an actual surface into a light source. You'll notice that it becomes transparent, but it also has light attributes now. So we can talk about the color of the light, the intensity of the light, the exposure, and how much light it actually gives off. It automatically sends light off up. So if I switch back over and I look at my picture, I still will barely see anything on the box. It's kind of right there, but it's hard to see because most of the light from this is going straight up. There's very little light that's coming off to the side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my rotate tool, and I'm going to take and turn my light so that it's facing and a little bit down this block. Now, I'm going to use a different renderer. We've talked about this one here, and we've done this several times. I'm going to use the IPR renderer. It's a current frame real-time renderer. So I'm going to click IPR. And the nice thing about this renderer is as I change the attributes over here, I can watch what happens. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take and bring up the intensity. So remember, I've used the IPR renderer for this one. I've set it up. It's a real-time renderer. It's going to show me what I'm looking for. I'm going to take that intensity all the way up to 10. It's going to think for a second, and then I can see how I have that light. Now notice it's perfectly flat, so the only thing I'm really seeing is that front surface, okay? So I want to move this out of the way, and I'm going to switch to my W tool, and I'm going to move this up, and I'm going to move it over. Now that I'm on this side of the block, I'm getting both the 2 and the B because I'm a little bit farther towards the right. Because it's a little farther towards the right, it's going to open up those other sides as well. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my exposure up to 1. As much as you can, try and keep the exposure levels below 1 unless you absolutely have to increase them. It's always better to increase the intensity if you can than it is the exposure. This is a little bit of a chance to kind of just play and figure out where things are with the intensity, exposure, and the placement of the light. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that it kind of fills up the screen a little bit more, and I can kind of see a little bit better picture over here on the side. Okay. Once I've done that, if I want a little more light and I want to be able to see a little bit more, I could put in a second one if I wanted to. So I'm going to close that out. I'm going to come back over here to my poly modeling. Once again, I'm going to make a surface. This time I'm going to put it kind of in the back and off to the right. Same thing as before. I'm going to go over to Arnold. I'm going to hit the Create Mesh Light. It's going to turn that into a light. Remember, the light is going straight up. I'm going to use the Rotate tool so that I can spin it kind of back towards and down. So I want it to kind of be showing off that back corner. I'm going to use the double I'm going to move it up. And once again, we're going to set my intensity to 10. I'm going to leave my exposure on this one to 0. I want it to be slightly darker than the front light. I want that front light to have a little bit more power. I'm going to use my IPR renderer and see where we are when we redo it. Okay. And now I get a really good picture that I can see. So I've got light from the back. You can see there's a little bit of shadow here. I have light from the front, a little bit of shadow on the top over there because my light's kind of shifted off towards the front. It gives me a little bit of texture, a little bit of depth as I'm looking at that piece. Now I can go to File. I can save my image. And then just like I've done in the past, I can give it an image name. You definitely want to take and make sure that you do the color managed piece here or your picture is going to be very dark. Okay, we can use that and you want to set it to be a JPEG. So make sure you're doing those pieces when you go to save. Save as a JPEG, make sure it's color managed, give it a name, and then you can click the save button.